That's my screen.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Um, Hi, everyone. So I'm Neil Price with Posey Witten and my colleague Andy Walker from Weston and Sampson. I want to say hello to everyone. Thank you for having us here to talk about this exciting project that we were thrilled to be part of. Should say that in addition to a bunch of support from our respective companies internally, it was great to have a lot of collaboration and input with members of the task force subcommittee here, Martin and Sarah and Vicky and Brad and Wayne in particular, amongst others. There's been, hopefully most people have seen various versions of this report, and it got better at every iteration and with every bit of input that we got along the way here. So let me just say, I do want to have a lot of opportunity for comment and discussion. So we're going to kind of go through this quickly. I think most people here have seen a little bit of this before. But what this is a complement to the project that you saw last month by Dewberry, which I must say that I have yet to actually see the analysis of the various engineering alternatives. But the intent was that our modeling alternatives here would mesh with some of those alternatives evaluations. So the idea was that by doing this study, we could help prioritize what options might give you the most bang for the buck for spending money to do different water supply alternatives to produce the best flow benefits in various segments of the river. So we start with a little bit background on the watershed, because I think all are mostly familiar, but does have limited sand and gravel extents, which limits the amount of groundwater storage. There are a good number of groundwater wells that are in close proximity to the river. So again, the influence of those wells is more direct the closer you are to the river and with the lesser amount of groundwater storage there is. So that creates a situation where you do get a kind of greater impact from water withdrawals than you might in some other watersheds. Let's take, for example, the Plymouth Carver Aquifer, where I happen to be living in. In addition, the aquifer has a lot of wetlands with low slopes, so there's a lot of evapotranspiration losses and the potential for flow restrictions, both from man-made dams, undersized culverts, beaver dams, and the like. Perhaps most importantly, from a human perspective, is that a lot of the population that uses the water supply withdrawn from the watershed actually live outside of the watershed, and their wastewater is exported outside of the watershed, resulting in a net loss. So those withdrawals that leave the watershed some of them don't come back in. A large proportion don't come back in. Next, please, Andy. So, as I said, this study is intended to sync with the Dewberry study. Next, please. And what we did here, so this is essentially a mass balance water budget model that is kind of tabulating the ins and outs on a sub-basin scale throughout the watershed. And at its core, it's using the Water Management Act tool and the swimming metrics within that. I think most everyone is familiar with that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. But the reason for that is it is the regulatory basis through which the Water Management Act is done in Massachusetts. And the Water Management Act is really the primary regulatory lever available there. I mean, clearly, we're all going to acknowledge that there are multiple causes for flow alteration, stormwater, et cetera. But in this situation with this project, we're talking about public water supply because of the fact that there is this Water Management Act and there are regulations in place, and there is a set of guiding principles in place to help evaluate those. And those are the SWMI metrics. So amongst those are groundwater category, which is based on flow alteration. 5 is the worst, 5 is red, 1 is the best, 1 is blue, and the shades in between. Net groundwater depletion, which is a comparison of the amount of withdrawals offset by wastewater and other recharges compared to what is called the unaffected August median flow, which comes out of another tool called the Sustainable Yield Estimator. And then biological category is BC, and that's based on net groundwater depletion and some other metrics that are not really relevant to this particular discussion. And again, 1 through 5, 5 being the worst, in red, and 1 the best. So we worked with these existing metrics and this existing tool because it provided a context that was familiar and useful, with the idea being we could evaluate alternatives and see, is there a way that certain subbasins could actually have their regulatory threshold changed based on changing how water supply is done? And the task force, the subcommittee on the task force, picked 6 scenarios, and they were purposely intended to be endpoint scenarios of essentially ending all public water supply withdrawals in specific towns from May to September. And the idea of that was just to really try to stress the model to see, like, can we actually get results? So, and then in practical application of this after the fact, you can dial that back as you see fit, but it would be nice to know if you were to do everything possible in any given subbasin, what might that effect be to help you choose which alternatives make the most sense? You might ask, why not just use the Water Management Act tool as it exists? And the reason being that it's sort of a set up kind of to evaluate permit applications. So if you do something in increase a well supply or a well extraction, what might its impact be? And it doesn't work well to evaluate the cumulative effects and everything. So and Andy deserves the vast bulk of the credit for doing this nitty-gritty Excel work, exported all of this Water Management tool data and formulas out to Excel, and then redid it in a way that allowed changes to be made systemically and be able to view the results subbasin by subbasin and cumulatively from upstream to downstream. So if you were to change in an upstream subbasin, its impacts would be reflected all the way downstream as a result. Next, please.
This is where
again, the goal.
I have to take over.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. We'll let Andy go on from here now, please.
Yeah, as Neil was alluding to, the Water Management Act is a fantastic tool at looking at how changing one source or one subbasin at a time may affect the flow alteration or the groundwater category or some of the other WMA metrics in that subbasin. What the WMA tool, as it was built, isn't capable of doing is evaluating, turning multiple individual wells off all at one time. And it's not, as it's built now, it's not capable of showing not only how do groundwater increases or decreases affect those subbasins in which the wells are modified, but what does that mean in downstream subbasins? So this model that we built off of the WMA tool was designed to address some of those shortcomings is too strong of a word, but some of the things that we wanted to do in support of this project that the WMA tool, as it stands today, is incapable of looking at. So, the key things are evaluating changes to multiple sources, simultaneously, right? Turning multiple wells on and off simultaneously, or reducing their withdrawals. Adding in a seasonality or lag effect to it, right? Right now, the WMA tool, if you make a reduction, it immediately changes the WMA metrics at a 1-to-1 ratio. But in truth, when you turn a groundwater well off, it may take days, weeks, months, in some aquifers, years for that benefit to be fully experienced by surface water bodies. So we wanted to incorporate that sort of lag as well. We talked about wanting to be able to evaluate impacts sort of propagating downstream. And I think Neil and I both approached this project wanting to build off peer-reviewed science and existing tools, right? So much hard work and excellent work has gone into studying the Ipswich over the last 20 plus years. We certainly didn't want to start from scratch. We wanted to build off of and sort of stand on the shoulders of that great work. So as Neil alluded to, we took this WMA tool, which currently works in Microsoft Access, converted it to Microsoft Excel for 2 reasons. The first is it's sort of it's easier to manipulate, or at least it's easier for most of us to manipulate. It's also maybe more portable and it could be used by more folks in the watershed. We sort of broke it apart. Right now, everything's done on a sub-basin basis, but all the inputs and outputs to each sub-basin are cumulative and reflect all the natural and anthropogenic inflows and outflows upstream of that sub-basin. So we sort of disassembled all that, and so all the inflows and outflows are now strictly representative of each of the sub-basins they occur within, so that we could sort of add and subtract sub-basins one to another all the way downstream to our heart's content. We also set it up so that sort of the output screen shows how WMA metrics would change in all sub-basins, not just the ones that are being manipulated. And we converted it so instead of manipulating groundwater withdrawals within a sub-basin, we set it up so that it's preloaded with all of the active public water supply drinking wells in the watershed, and they can be flipped on and off with sort of a drop-down menu, or their withdrawals could be reduced, and there's a place where you can input all that information. We added in that sort of season out, that lag method, right? Neil mentioned that all the alternatives or scenarios that we looked at were focused on sort of turning all the water supply wells off in an individual community or communities in May, and then you're hoping to see a benefit late in the summer, early fall when water levels are at their lowest. And so that 3 or 4 month lag, we wanted to be able to incorporate that into the model. We'll mention that a little bit more briefly in a minute. And the last thing we want to do is preserve all those great WMA tool outputs like groundwater category and biologic category and see how those might change as a result of different scenarios. But we also wanted to see how the affected August median flow might change. August median flow is sort of a benchmark metric for looking at the health of streams. And that comes out of a lot of great studies and evaluations. So we wanted one of the outputs of this model to indicate how much the August median flow, as affected by groundwater withdrawals and other influences, how that might change as a result of the different scenarios.
Andy, you became just slightly muffled in the last minute. I don't know if you've shifted your mic.
Maybe here. Is that better?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Thank you so much for letting me know.
Sure.
So moving on, one of the first things we did was recognizing the fact that the WMA tool was developed 15, 20 years ago, and that it's built on a lot of public and private drinking water withdrawals and public wastewater returns and septic. All those inflow and outflow volumes are based on sort of baseline data from the early 2000s, and a lot has changed in the Ipswich. One of the major changes that we were aware of was public drinking water withdrawals, community drinking water withdrawals have significantly decreased over that time, from nearly 9 million gallons a day in the early 2000s to a little bit more than 4 million gallons a day in the 2018 to 2022 period. And kudos to the Watershed Association and others for helping tabulate that 2018 to 2022 data. That was very helpful. Other important inflows and outflows that I want to mention are private well withdrawals. Certainly, private wells do represent a significant sort of outflow from stored water in the watershed. That has been studied to some effect, the sort of change in the amount of water that's been withdrawn over time. There's some sort of disagreement on it. I say private wells, it can also be called below threshold, and there's some overlap between that terminology. But there is some data on how private well withdrawals have changed over time, but it's not available at the sub-basin scale, so we couldn't incorporate any of those changes that have occurred over the last 20 years. We couldn't incorporate those changes into the model, so I'll highlight that. Similar story with groundwater discharge and private septic system discharge. Those have not been updated from their original WMA values either, for similar reasons. The data is simply not available on a sub-basin basis. One last change we were asked to make was there are a small number of groundwater withdrawals that have been over the last 20 years sort of migrated to surface water withdrawals. We've incorporated those changes.
I think we're just losing your audio again right there at the end. Not totally losing it, but something got covered.
Hang on a sec. I apologize. Let me change the audio settings here. About that. Right, this should make it a little bit better. Can folks hear me okay?
It's good enough, Andy. Carry
okay.
on. Yeah.
All right. This slide speaks to how the WMA tool metrics have changed as a result of sort of updating the public water supply withdrawals, called the updated baseline, reducing the public drinking water withdrawals from about 9 million gallons to about 4.2 million gallons a day, has resulted in an estimated flow alteration sort of averaged across the whole watershed. That's been, the flow alteration has been reduced from 54% to 28%. So a significant reduction there. The groundwater category, which I think most folks are familiar with, that's been reduced from 3.4 to 2.82, right? And these are sort of regulatory definitions. These outputs are defined, I think net groundwater depletion is particularly interesting, right? So based on the 2000 to 2004 baseline data, the watershed on average was 29% depleted, so sort of overtapped. That's been reduced to just 3% depleted. And you can see that in the maps on the right. On the top are the sort of the depletion based on original WMA values, and then on the bottom are the updated values. And you can see that the reductions in public drinking water withdrawals have resulted in changes in net groundwater depletion throughout the watershed, and a lot of subbasins are benefiting from that. I will highlight, though, and this will come up again later, the August median flow as calculated by the by our model, which is developed from the WMA tool. The August median flow on average in the watershed has increased, is shown to increase from 0.168 to 0.184 cubic feet per square mile. What that means is that the USGS gauge in Ipswich that would supposedly see an increase from 21 CFS to 23 CFS as a typical August flow. We recognize that those are not typical August flows. The Ipswich gauge does not usually experience those flows in August. So
Andy, you're breaking up again. So while you're playing, I will just take this opportunity with this data to make a point that I meant to earlier. Right. So this clearly is showing significant modeled improvements in the watershed based on the changes that have occurred in water supply over the past 20 years. And there is disagreement amongst various stakeholders about how much these improvements have really manifest in reality, in particular in the lower river. So comparing the Willowdale gauge versus the upstream gauge, and it appears that these benefits are reality closer mirrors the modeling in the upstream watersheds as compared to the downstream watersheds. And there's many reasons that are possible here, but I want to take this opportunity to say that they're not really that important. This model is not intended to be a predictive of actual flow conditions. It's intended to relatively evaluate water supply options for benefit. So we shouldn't get too wrapped up in what these actual numbers are, or if things are as good or bad as the model is showing in reality. So try again, Andy, if you're back online.
Yeah, how's this? Is this at all better?
Good, very good.
Okay. All right, I've gone through all of the audio settings. This is my last try. Yeah, let's get to the interesting stuff. These are the 6 scenarios that we evaluated and were provided by the task force. As you can see, in this column here, these are, right, so scenario 1 was envisioned by all the water supplies in Wilmington, or all the public drinking water wells in Wilmington. Their withdrawals were ceased in May. And then, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, what was the benefit of that come August or September? And then scenario 2 looked at Linfield. Scenario 3 was Danvers Middleton. And so we looked at each one of these in turn. And the last one, scenario 6, is just a combination of the other 5. This column here this is the reduction. This is how much, how many million gallons a day were turned off, so to speak. And we've mentioned once or twice this idea of a lag effect, that there's not a one-to-one relationship between changes in groundwater withdrawals to what's experienced in nearby surface water bodies. And so this model incorporates the ability to look at that. And when we did see that there was relatively little influence there, that the difference between a one-to-one relationship and incorporating that lag effect was generally within 10%, 5 to 10%. So for scenario 1, for instance, the wells account for 1.837 million gallons a day. If they're turned off in May, by August, September, the benefit to the stream nearby is 1.664 million gallons a day. So pretty close. So in coordinating with the task force, we sort of move forward with the rest of the analysis. We just assume that there's going to be a one-to-one relationship to simplify things. But by incorporating that lag effect into our model, we're able to prove that that's a reasonable assumption. I'm going to show a bunch of maps. This is just a screenshot of the legend, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. The maps you'll see are focused on the change in net groundwater depletion, and there's 31, 32 subbasins in the watershed, and each one has their own percent change, but we put them into a couple of buckets. So if you see a subbasin that's white, it means there was no change as a result of the scenario we're looking at. And then different shades of blue. The darker the blue, the greater the change, the greater the improvement in net groundwater depletion. And you'll also notice some of them have a hatching over top of this shade of blue, and that just indicates a subbasin that was depleted under baseline conditions with the updated 2018 to 2022 withdrawal data. So it's depleted today, but that as a result of the scenario, it's no longer depleted and now has an excess of flow. And the other thing I'll just mention is I'll point them out, but there's some red circles. Full disclosure, they do blend in with the non-community groundwater source TAP symbol, but I will point to them. Those are the individual wells that were envisioned as being turned off as part of the scenarios. Okay, just going to move this little pane off to the side so I can see. This is a comparison of scenario 1 to baseline conditions. So this is focused on Wilmington, and it's turning off about 1.8 million gallons a day of public wells in May, and these are the benefits in September. So you can see a number of subbasins benefit from this, not only in the upper watershed where the wells are located, but those benefits propagate downstream in a significant way. And in fact, there's a number of subbasins all down the main stem of the Ipswich that as a result of this would no longer be considered net groundwater depleted. So you can see these benefits propagate very, very far away downstream. Scenario 2 is focused on Linfield. It's a reduction of about 500,000 gallons a day of groundwater withdrawals. You can see they're focused right here. These benefits just visually are less significant. You can see lighter shades of blue, and it's only the subbasins in the immediate area that are no longer net groundwater depleted. The benefits do extend downstream along the main stem of the Ipswich, but the benefits are more muted, lighter shades of blue, and these subbasins remain depleted. Scenario 3 involves elimination of groundwater pumping from this well here. Right, this is the Danvers Middleton scenario. It also involves the cessation of surface water withdrawals from 2 inline reservoirs. A reminder that the WMA tool does not model surface water explicitly. Surface water is not considered in the calculation of net groundwater depleted. So this map is slightly misleading. the majority of the benefit of this scenario is derived from the cessation of withdrawals from the reservoirs, but the WMA tool is only capable of looking at the benefits of groundwater, of changes to groundwater wells. Our model does have the